They tell you, in the official Concordat record, that the Maw of Vesh was lost to a navigational miscalculation. They tell you the fire that took the yard was an accident of stored fuel and old wiring, a tragedy of neglect, nobody's fault in particular. I have read that record. I helped certify the inventory it is built upon. And I am telling you now, with the last clean breath in my body, that the official record is a lie written by frightened clerks to make a wound look like a stumble. I should know I was the clerk. My name does not matter to you, but I will give it anyway, because a thing should be named before it is buried. I am Vethu, third-tier appraiser of the Reclamation Concordat, of the people you would call the Osvin. We are a salvage species. We do not build empires and we do not fight wars. We catalog. We arrive after the empires and the wars are finished, and we measure what is left, and we assign it a value, and we strip it down to the value we assigned. To my people, a thing is worth precisely the sum of its recoverable parts. A dead warship is not a tragedy. It is a manifest. A ruined city is not a loss. It is a list of materials awaiting collection. That is how we saw the humans, as a list, a short one. So understand the question I am asking you to sit with, the same question that has eaten the inside of my carapace for the rest of my short remaining life. How does a condemned hull tagged for scrapping, crewed by a species we did not even bother to fully catalog, become the single object that broke the Krelith tide and rewrote the price of every human in charted space? How does the garbage stand up off the heap and walk back toward the ones who threw it away? If you have ever appraised something and gotten the number wrong, stay with me. Because I got the number very, very wrong, and I want you to understand exactly how it happened, beat by beat, before the lie hardens into history. The humans came to the Maw of Vesh the way most things came to us. Towed in, half-dead, leaking. Their generation vessel had taken a coolant breach on the long crawl out of a system that no longer wanted them, and they limped into our gravity well on the last of their reserves. 4,000 refugees, and a captain who would not stop transmitting on every frequency we had until somebody answered. The captain's name was Dorothy Akebraze. I logged it myself in the intake column beside the assessed value of her people. I will not tell you what number I wrote in that column. I am ashamed of it now in a way my species does not have a proper word for, so I will use one of theirs. I wrote a number, and the number was an insult, and she knew it was an insult the moment the translation reached her, and she did not flinch. She simply asked what we would give her people to live in. Yard Command thought this was very funny. There is a thing salvage crews do, a joke as old as the trade, where you assign a desperate arrival the worst hull on the books and watch them realize it. And the worst hull on our books by a wide margin was the wreck in Bay 9. A Halberd-class heavy cruiser, 3 centuries decommissioned, structurally condemned, half its spine cut away for parts, its reactor pulled, its weapons stripped to the mountings, its hull tagged in my own catalog with the designation that means do not bother recovering, not worth the fuel to tow. We had been using it as a parts donor and a place to dump slag. It was not a ship anymore. It was a manifest with the lights off. That is what we gave them. We gave them a corpse and called it a home, and we did it laughing. And here is where the first thing happened that I did not understand until much later. The humans took the corpse. They did not argue the assessment. They did not beg for a better hull. Captain Akebraze walked the length of that dead cruiser with a lamp and a slate, and her engineer, a heavyset man named Tomas Vainberg, walked beside her, and at the end of it she put her hand flat on the cold bulkhead the way you would touch the flank of a sick animal, and she said something to it, to the ship. Out loud. I was logging the transfer and I heard it through the open comm. She said, "All right, we'll make something of you yet." And then they named it. This is the part where I have to confess to a failure of my own profession, and it is the part the humans found endlessly entertaining about us, so I will give it to you straight. My job, my entire function, is to maintain an accurate inventory. Every object in the Maw of Vesh has a designation, and the designation does not change because the designation is the truth of the object. The Halberd wreck in Bay 9 had a designation. I had assigned it. The humans renamed it within the hour. They called it the second chance. I logged that. 3 days later it was the old girl. I logged that too, with a cross-reference which is improper. By the end of the first week the crew were calling it the Lazarus, which I did not understand until one of them explained the reference, and then I understood it and wished I had not. Within a month I had filled an entire amendment sheet with names: the cathedral, the junkyard dog, the spite, and one I am still not sure was a name and not just something a tired welder shouted at it at 4 in the morning. They spoke to it. They thanked it when a repair held. They cursed it when one failed. They assigned it a temperament, a history, a soul. To my people this is not eccentricity. It is a category error so fundamental it is almost obscene. You do not name the manifest. You do not love the materials. The value of a thing is the sum of its parts, and a thing with a soul cannot be cleanly stripped because every cut is now an injury. I could not log the vessel because the humans would not let it hold still long enough to be a vessel. They kept turning it back into a person. I filed a complaint about the nomming, actually. For the record, it is in the official archive if the official archive still exists, which it does not. Appraiser Vethu requests clarification on the designation of asset Bay 9 Halberd, the asset's operators having assigned it no fewer than 11 non-standard identifiers within the assessment period. Yard Command's response, logged the same day, was a single line. Asset is worthless. Let the short-lived ones call it whatever keeps them quiet. Worthless. I want you to hold on to that word because my entire people held on to it, and it is the rope we hanged ourselves with. You have to understand how thoroughly we had written the humans off, because the writing off was not cruelty exactly. It was appraisal. We looked at them the way we look at everything, and we measured, and the measurements were genuinely poor. They were short-lived. 60, 80 of their years and they were finished, where one of my people might catalog for 3 centuries. They were soft, no carapace, no redundancy in their organs, a single heart, a body that failed if you so much as breached its skin. They were slow to mature and slower to replace their losses. By every metric the Concordat uses to assess the worth of a labor population, they ranked at the very bottom of the manifest. Fragile, expensive to maintain, poor return on materials. The chief appraiser, an old Osvane named in the records as Skell Vern, summarized the human valuation in a meeting I attended, and the meeting laughed, and I laughed too. May my own ledger be balanced against me for it. He said the humans were a species that had spent everything they had just getting to our doorstep, and now they had nothing left to spend. And a population with nothing left to spend is a population you simply wait out. You do not need to harm the worthless. You only need to deny them, and let arithmetic do the rest. So we denied them. This is the truth the official record buried deepest, so let me be precise, the way I was trained to be precise. We gave the humans no parts allocation, meaning anything they pulled from the dead hulls of Bay 9 they pulled as theft, technically, though no one bothered to stop them because what could they possibly do with our garbage? We placed them last in the ration priority, behind even the maintenance drones, so that in the lean cycles the human children went thin while the drones stayed charged. We gave them no berth in the defensive registry, meaning that on every plan for the protection of the Maw of Vesh, and there were such plans, filed and forgotten, the 4,000 humans in Bay 9 simply did not appear. They were not assets to be defended. They were slag that had not yet been swept. I walked through their bay once during the assessment period to verify some figures. I will tell you what I saw because the official record does not contain it. I saw a people building a civilization inside a tomb. They had run lines for water and air through the dead ship's old veins. They had a school. They had a place where they grew something green under salvaged lamps. The engineer Vainberg had a workshop in the gutted reactor chamber, and it was the most organized space I had ever seen a human occupy. Every tool hung in its place. Every salvaged component sorted and labeled in a system I did not recognize but could tell, with my appraiser's eye, was rigorous. And Captain Akebraze met me at the threshold of her dead ship and asked me politely what my assessment was, what number I had given her people. I told her the truth, because my people do not lie about figures, only about everything else. I told her that by concordat measure, her population had a recovery value approaching zero, that there was, in the cold language of the manifest, nothing worth taking. She looked at me for a long moment with those small, wet eyes humans have, and she did not get angry, which I had braced for. She smiled instead, which I had not. And she said a thing I logged that night in my private notes, not the official ones, because I could not make it fit any official column. She said, "That's the most dangerous mistake you can make about a person, telling them they've got nothing left to lose." I did not understand it then. I understood it later on fire, far too late. While the humans were turning their tomb into a home, the thing that would kill us all was already coming, and the leadership of the Maw of Vesh did with that warning exactly what doomed leadership always does. They filed it, and they ignored it, and they used the time they should have spent surviving to instead make themselves a little richer. The warning came from a junior watch officer, an Osvin named Renth Sul, who I knew slightly and respected, which among my people is a thing you do not say lightly. Renth Sul tracked the long-range debris signatures, the faint trash wake that any large fleet leaves as it moves, and 3 cycles before it mattered, she identified the wake of the Krelith tide bending toward our system. You will not have a clean word for the Krelith. They are not an empire and not a nation and not even properly a species in the way you would mean it. They are a swarm, a self-replicating raider mass that descends on a system, strips every scrap of metal and every gram of biomass down to the rock, breeds itself fatter on the spoils, and moves on, leaving a sterilized husk behind. They do not negotiate because they do not want anything you could offer. They want the materials you are made of. They had stripped 4 systems on their current run. The Maw of Vesh, a yard packed with centuries of harvested metal and 4,000 soft bodies, was not a target to them. It was a feast laid out and waiting. Renth Sul brought this to Yard Command with the projections and the timeline, and a recommendation that we recall the Yard's defensive batteries from where they had been deployed and reactivate the old picket grid. Here is what Yard Command had done with the defensive batteries. They had sold them, not all at once, not in a single obvious theft, but the way rot always works, a piece at a time, justified each time. The picket grid had been decommissioned for parts during a lean cycle, the parts sold to a passing concordat hauler, the proceeds distributed quietly among the senior appraisers, and the absence logged as planned maintenance. The main batteries had been leased out to a mining consortium 2 systems over because idle weapons are depreciating assets and a leased asset generates revenue. By the time Renth Sul brought her warning, the Maw of Vesh, a yard that on paper was one of the better defended installations in the sector, was, in physical fact, naked. We had eaten our own walls and sold the bricks. And Skelvern, the chief appraiser, the man who had set the human valuation at 0, listened to Renth Sul's warning and dismissed it with the most expensive sentence ever spoken in our system's history. He said the Krelith would not waste their mass on a yard so deep in a dead star's gravity well. He said the treaties of transit protected us. He said, and this is logged, this is in the record I myself helped certify, that Watch Officer Renth Sul was overvaluing the threat and undervaluing the protections, and that her assessment was therefore inaccurate. Inaccurate. To an appraiser, there is no worse charge. He did not just dismiss her. He filed a correction against her competence, and she was reassigned to inventory drudgery in a sealed records bay, where she could not frighten anyone with the truth, and where she would later be the only senior officer to survive, because the records bay was the one place the fire did not reach. I think about Renth Sul more than I think about almost anything. She did the one thing my profession exists to do. She measured the threat correctly, and for measuring it correctly she was buried alive in a records bay by men who had measured it wrong, and who could not survive the gap between her number and theirs except by pretending hers did not exist. If you want to know the moment the Maw of Vesh died, It was not the moment the Krelith arrived. It was the moment a frightened, dishonest old appraiser decided that a correct number was a threat to his comfort, and chose his comfort. Everything after that was just the arithmetic catching up. Now we come to the weeks that I, personally, misread most completely. And I have to be honest about my misreading because it is the whole hinge of the thing. In those weeks, the humans worked. We could see them working. From the gantries of the central yard, you could look down into Bay 9 and watch the small soft figures swarming over the dead halberd hull, and you could watch them dragging salvage out of the other condemned wrecks, the gutted destroyers, the slag ships, the parts donors, and hauling it back into their own tomb. We watched them strip a reactor core out of a dead frigate, 3 of them dying in the process, and wrestle it across the bay. We watched them cut and weld and argue and sleep in shifts and start again. We watched lights burn in that dead ship at all hours, and we heard on the open frequencies the sound of them talking to it, nomming it, coaxing it. And every Osvin who watched, including me, came to the same comfortable conclusion. The poor, desperate humans were trying to fix their wreck. They were trying to make the dead cruiser fly again so they could flee the yard before the lean cycle starved them out, or after the rumors of the Krelith spread despite Command's denials, so they could run before the swarm arrived. We even pitied them, a little, in the contemptuous way you pity a thing struggling against arithmetic. You cannot make a halberd class fly with garbage and grief. The hull was condemned for reasons. The spine was cut. They could weld every scrap of slag in the yard to that wreck and it would never be a ship again. We knew this. We were appraisers. We knew exactly what that hull was worth and exactly what it could and could not become. That was the misdirection, and it was so total because it was built out of our own expertise. We were not fooled by a trick. We were fooled by being correct about the wrong question. We asked, can they repair the ship? And we answered no, and we were right, and being right made us stop looking. Because the humans were never repairing the ship. I know this now because of what Renth Sewell found later in the salvage records, the requisitions and the cutting logs, and because of the one conversation I had with Thomas Weinberg, the engineer, near the end, which I will get to. But the shape of it is this. A halberd-class heavy cruiser, even condemned, even gutted, is not nothing. It is a spine of high-grade structural alloy, a hull rated to take fire, mounting points engineered to bear the recoil of weapons that no longer existed, and a reactor cavity built to hold and channel an enormous amount of power. We had appraised all of that as parts, as recoverable value, as a manifest. The humans appraised it as a frame. They were not trying to make the halberd fly. They had looked at the dead cruiser, and at the dozen other condemned hulls we had given them the run of, and at the centuries of harvested weapons-grade salvage piled around the yard that we considered worthless because it was obsolete or incomplete or pulled from ships whose designs no one supported anymore. And they had asked a question my entire species is constitutionally incapable of asking. Not what is this worth? Not what can I recover? But what can I make this do? And the answer they built in the dark in their tomb while we pitied them was a weapon. Not a ship that could fight. A single object, the size of a cruiser, that could do exactly one thing one time. They had taken a frame rated to channel enormous power and the salvaged guts of a dozen dead warships, and they had welded the whole condemned yard into one gun. We watched them build it and we logged it as a repair. That is the sentence I will carry into my own grave. We watched them build the thing that saved us, and we filed it under maintenance. The Krelith tide came out of the dark on a cycle I will not forget, and they came exactly as Renth Sewell had said they would, and the Maw of Vesh had exactly the defenses Skelvern had left us, which is to say none. I will not dress up what happened to my people in those first hours, because they did not earn dressing up, and because the truth is the only thing I have left to give. The yard panicked. The Krelith swarm front hit the outer slag fields and began to feed, and the feeding is a thing the mind refuses to hold, metal and rock and bodies drawn into the mass and reduced and incorporated. the swarm growing visibly fatter as it ate. Yard Command, the men who had sold our walls, did the thing such men always do. They ran for the haulers. They abandoned the yard, abandoned the workers, abandoned the 4,000 humans they had never bothered to put on a defense plan, and they fought each other for berths on the few vessels that could flee the gravity well. And the gravity well that Skelvern had promised would protect us instead trapped most of them. And they died in their fine fleeing ships clawing at controls they had never learned to use because flying was beneath an appraiser. I did not run. I would like to tell you it was courage. It was not. It was that I was an appraiser to the marrow and I could not stop watching, could not stop measuring, even as the numbers became the end of everything. So I was watching Bay 9 when the dead ship woke up. The humans did not flee. That was the first wrong note in the symphony of our panic, the thing that made me grip the gantry rail and stare. Every other living thing in the maw of Vesh was moving away from the Krelith. The dead halberd in Bay 9 was moving toward it. It came out of the bay slowly, ugly, wrong. A cruiser-sized mass of welded scrap and cannibalized hulls and centuries of our garbage fused into a single brutal shape. And it should not have been able to move at all. And it moved, on salvaged thrusters bolted to a condemned frame, straight toward the feeding swarm. And the running lights along its hull were not the white of a Concordat vessel. The humans had painted it or lit it, I never learned which, in a single hard color, and along its flank large enough to read from the gantries, they had written a name. Not one of the 11 names I had failed to log. A new one. The last one. They had written, in human script that the yard's translators rendered for all of us to see, the word reckoning. And then it fired. I have spent my life appraising weapons. I have catalogued the batteries of dead empires. I had never seen, and will never see again, anything like what came out of that condemned hull. They had taken the reactor cavity built to power a heavy cruiser and the salvaged accumulators of a dozen dead ships, and they had not built a weapon that could fire many times. They had built a weapon that could fire once. Everything they had, every scrap of power in that frame, every recovered cell, the reactor itself driven past every limit a sane species observes. They poured into a single discharge, and the frame that had been engineered 3 centuries ago to bear the recoil of a heavy cruiser's main battery bore it, barely, for the one instant it needed to. The discharge went into the Krelith swarm front like a blade into a throat. It did not scatter them. It cored them. A line of annihilation punched straight through the densest part of the feeding mass, through the breeding hearts where the swarm grew itself fatter, and the swarm is a thing that lives by mass and arithmetic. And in a single instant the humans had subtracted more of its mass than 4 systems worth of feeding had added. The Krelith tide, which does not feel fear because it does not feel anything, nonetheless did the one thing its arithmetic permitted. It calculated that the maw of Vesh now cost more to finish than it was worth to eat. And it turned, and it left, and it took its losses into the dark to breed them back somewhere cheaper. The garbage had stood up off the heap, and it had not run. It had walked back toward the swarm and put it down with a single, perfect, suicidal blow, and then it drifted, dark and spent and utterly inert, a corpse again, having lived for exactly 1 shot. The legend started before the fires were even out, and the legend was wrong, and I need to correct it, because the wrong version is the version that flatters everyone and teaches nothing. The version that spread through the salvage lanes, the version that the survivors told, was that the humans had gone berserk. That cornered and doomed, the short-lived ones had flung themselves at the swarm in a glorious suicidal frenzy, a species too primitive to flee, dying in a blaze of animal defiance. It is a satisfying story. It lets my people keep their appraisal of humans almost intact, still primitive, still doomed, only now with a romantic streak of savagery added to the manifest. It changes the number a little, without changing the category. It is a lie, and I can prove it is a lie, because I spoke to Thomas Weinberg in the hour between the firing and the end, and there was nothing berserk about him. There was nothing berserk about any of it. I found him because I went down into the ruined yard when the swarm turned, half mad myself, looking for I do not know what, and I found the engineer sitting on a slag heap watching the dark drifting hulk of the thing they had built, and he was not raging or weeping. He was tired in the specific way of a worker who has finished a long job correctly. I had to ask him. The appraiser in me could not die even then. I asked him how. How they had known the single shot would be enough. How they had known the frame would hold. How they had known the swarm would do the arithmetic and leave rather than press on through their losses. And he told me in the flat, exhausted voice of a man explaining something obvious, that they had not gone mad. They had done the math. The captain, Akebraze, had understood the Krellith from the first rumor the way no Osvin ever did, because she understood being a thing that other things wanted to consume. She knew the swarm did not hate them and could not be frightened, that it only added and subtracted, mass against cost. So the humans had not built a weapon to destroy the Krellith, which was impossible. They had built a weapon to change one number, to make the cost of finishing the maw of Vesh exceed the value of eating it. One shot, placed precisely into the breeding mass, was not an act of defiance. It was an invoice. It was the humans handing the swarm a bill too large to pay and trusting the swarm's own cold arithmetic to do the rest. It was, Vainberg said, the most disciplined thing he had ever been part of. Every death in the building of it had been counted and accepted in advance. Every scrap of power had been allocated to the single discharge with an engineer's precision. There had been no frenzy. There had been a plan, executed by frightened people who held their fear in both hands and used it for fuel and did not let it touch the work. The humans had not won by being more savage than us. They had won by being better appraisers than us. They had looked at a heap of garbage and a doomed position and an enemy of pure arithmetic, and they had calculated correctly exactly how much destruction it would take to make the math turn in their favor. And then they had built precisely that much, and not one scrap more, and spent it all in a single instant. We are the species that measures worth, and the humans had outmeasured us using the very garbage we had thrown at their feet. The news of what happened at the Maw of Vesh moved faster than the Krellith ever could, and it did a thing to the charted lanes that I do not think has finished happening even now. It changed the human number. Before the Maw, the price of a human and my people price everything. Do not pretend yours do not. You only use softer words was set by our appraisal. Fragile, short-lived, low recovery value. A population you simply wait out. After the Maw, every appraiser in the sector had to add a new line to the human valuation, and it was a line my profession had never needed before, and we did not even have a clean term for it, so we borrowed theirs. We added the line for what a thing will do when you tell it it has nothing left to lose, and there is no number for that. It is the column that breaks the manifest, because it means the value of a human is not the sum of their parts and never was. It is the sum of their parts multiplied by their refusal to accept the value you assigned them, and refusal does not depreciate. Other species who had written humans off the way we did began, very quietly, to revise. Contracts changed. The soft, short-lived, expensive refugees became, almost overnight, a labor population that you were careful with, that you did not corner, that you did not, under any circumstances, tell that they had nothing left to lose. We had spent so long appraising humans as garbage that it had never occurred to us to ask what garbage does when it decides it is a weapon. And then there is the mystery, the part of the record I cannot certify, the part that keeps me awake in the small dark of my last days. When the fires were out and the survivors crept back into the ruined yard to count what remained, the humans were gone. Not dead, gone. The dead halberd hulk, the thing they had named Reckoning, had drifted spent into the slag fields after its single shot, and we expected to find it there, a corpse, with 4,000 corpses inside it. We found the hulk. It was empty. The bays of Bay 9 were empty. The school, the green growing place, the workshop where every tool hung in its place, stripped, cleared, gone, as if a people had packed up a civilization and walked it out the back of a tomb while the swarm and the fire held everyone's eyes. There were no human bodies in the Maw of Vesh. There were no haulers missing that could account for 4,000 people. There was no manifest anywhere of where they had gone or what they had left in. Renth Sul, who survived in her sealed records bay and who is the only reason any honest account exists at all, found one thing: a single human script notation, scratched into the bulkhead of the empty captain's quarters, which the translators rendered and which I have never been able to stop hearing. It said only, "Thank you for the parts." That is all. Thank you for the parts. They had taken our garbage, the worthless condemned slag we threw at them laughing, and they had built from it the thing that broke the Krelith tide, and then they had taken whatever they built next out of it, and they had walked off the edge of our records into the dark, and they had left us a thank you note for the materials. Where they went, what they are building now out there, out of whatever else the rest of the galaxy is foolish enough to throw away as worthless, that is not in any record. That is the part of the manifest that is still open. That is the line that has no closing figure and may not have one for a very long time. So here at the end is the appraisal I should have made at the beginning, the one I offer now to my own people, who will not hear it, because the fire took most of them and the lie took the rest. We told ourselves the Maw of Vesh fell to a navigational accident. It did not. It fell because a species that measures the worth of everything had forgotten that worth is not a fixed number stamped on a thing at the moment you find it. We looked at 4,000 desperate people and a condemned hull, and we wrote 0, 0, 0 down the whole column, and we mistook our contempt for accuracy. We thought we were appraising them. We were only appraising ourselves, and we did not like the answer, so we set it on fire. You cannot disarm a people by taking away their tools. This is the lesson, and my kind paid for it in a whole burned world, and I would have it cost you less. The humans had no weapons. We had made sure of that. We had no parts, no rations, no place on the defense plan, no value on the manifest. And out of nothing, out of the exact garbage we discarded, they built the one thing that mattered, because the only tool a desperate species truly needs is the refusal to accept the verdict you have written for them. Take everything else away and that one tool remains, and it is enough, and it is always pointed back at the one who did the taking. What you throw away does not disappear. It waits. It learns. And one day, lit along its flank with a name you taught it, it comes back for you, and it does not come in a frenzy. It comes with the math already done. So I will leave you, as the humans taught me to leave a thing, with a question instead of a figure. When you next look at something and decide that it is worthless, a hull, a heap, a person, a whole people you have written off as nothing left to lose, I want you to ask yourself the question my entire species was too proud to ask, the question that burned the Maw of Vesh down around our certainty. Are you appraising them? Or are you only telling them, out loud, exactly how to become the thing that ends you? I have balanced every other ledger in my life. This is the only entry I cannot close. I leave it open, and I leave it to you.